bookstore I've completely forgotten why we're here. We're at the UND bookstore to have the next event in the Institute for Philosophy in Public Life lecture series. My name is Jack Weinstein. I'm the director of the Institute. It's a beautiful day today in Grand Forks, so I'm impressed that we have a substantial audience. Everyone's tightly packed, and that's for a nice intimate conversation. We're here with Jesús Ilundáin, who is an assistant professor, although just turned associate professor, at Linfield College in Oregon, and he is an IPPL visiting fellow. If you in internet land are interested in becoming a fellow, check out the website that you're looking at, and there's more information on that. Jesús is here for 2 weeks to use our facilities and talk to the community and to talk to students and faculty and lots of people who are here now. He specializes in philosophy of sport and in existentialism, particularly Ortega y Gasset, who has influenced many people on the issue of philosophy and sport. Those of you who have listened to the Y Radio show and have been to some of our past events will recognize that he had an influence in the philosophy of hunting. But today, Jesús is going to be talking about the Olympics, the ancient Olympics, and its relationship to the Olympics that we see now, but also to the story that the movie 300 is very loosely based on. So I will leave you all to Jesús. We do have a chat room, so if you at home would like to chat, or if you have a computer in front of you and want to check out the chat room, that's fine too. It's right next to the video, so you can watch yourself watching him, and it's all very surreal. But thank you very much for coming, and when we do have the question and answer session afterwards, I'll ask you all to talk into the mic, not because we need a mic for this venue, but because that way people at home can hear your questions as well. Thank you very much. Jesús?
Thank you very much, Jack. And I guess, first of all, thank you very much for coming here in such a beautiful day. I wouldn't have come to listen to myself, but now it's too late for you. You're stuck, and I hope to make your while worthwhile, you know. So we're going to get started with a couple of things. First of all, before I get going, this talk I'm going to give you is based on a chapter for a book on the Olympic Games that Heather Reed and Mike Austin are editing for Kentucky University Press, and it will be coming up just before the Olympics. So any comments you can give me or feedback, I'll be very grateful. You know, in terms of hope shows up here, and that tells you also why I'm engaged in this kind of enterprise. The other thing is, as I go through the talk, feel free to ask questions or clarifications. Don't feel like you have to wait until the very end to ask them, unless you think it's a very, very big issue. Maybe we can wait for that, okay? Or else, you think that I'm talking too fast, which is not very rare. Please slow me down, all right, before I get going. Now, get ready. First of all, this is about 300 soldiers and the ancient Olympic Games, ethics and the class of Thermopylae. Now, to start with the warm-up, what I want to ask is this: what should Olympism be about philosophically? There is a sprinter's answer. Those who go very quick to the answer might think of Coubertin, who was the person who got started the Olympic Games, the modern Olympic Games, who said, "Citius altius fortius encapsulates the spirit." And that's pretty much, faster, higher, and stronger. Another sprinter might actually also speak of the Olympic Charter. It's important not to win, but to participate. Now, there is, of course, a little kind of lower standards, let's put it this way, compared to the first one. As we compare these two issues, and there is a little tension between the first one, which is driven to success and excel, and the other one, which kind of settles for comfort and what's easy, and just having a good time. In here, we're going to be going, instead of for a sprinter's answer, for slow thinking of a philosopher. On the radio show on Sunday, for example, they're speaking of philosophy as thinking in slow motion. And very much today, instead of trying to sprint for a quick answer, which I think is going to end up tripping us, we're going to go slower. And hopefully, we'll get faster. After all, you've all heard of Achilles and the tortoise, right? Or the parable where, the winner of this race is not Achilles, the fast runner, or the tortoise in the end. Or, at the very end. We'll actually meet both of them through the talk at different points, and we'll see how in the end the turtle, I think, will hopefully give us some insights as to how this works. So get to the topic at hand. I think that today's Olympic movement, the modern Olympics, are actually worn out in terms of the conceptual framework. There's a lot of ills. There's an obsession with records, fame, and money. There's a dubious performance-enhancing means, drugs, and so on. We also have cheating, consumerism, everything is for sale, nationalism, since that nowadays everything is about how many medals can a country get, if not, it's not a good Olympics. There's also gender bias, Eurocentrism, and so on. In other words, I think that the Olympic movement and the Games are more worn out than Athens' Parthenon. And we know what that looks like today. It's in very bad shape. We need to fix this up. And to do this, I propose to go back to ancient Greece. But as part of my answer, I'm going, slow with the turtle. I want to actually take a detour and take us through the hard gates of Thermopylae. Now, to get in the mood, so to speak, let's picture a couple of things. First of all, this is 480 BCE, 2,500 years ago. And there's the biggest Persian army that the world have ever seen. Some people say maybe 1 million, 2 million. That's not important. The issue is that there was a huge army that's going to conquer the Greek country. And who do they send to fight? Well, 300 Spartans and a few thousand soldiers from Thebans, Thebes, and so on, which now we're up to 7,000 only. Now, the question that we should ask ourselves is, what's going on with this? Let me give you a citation to put things in context and how I want to frame this talk today. Xerxes sends a spy, as a good general does, to see what are they doing, these people, before they fight me. I want to know my enemy. And this is what he finds out. This happened to the Spartans, and some of them were stripped for exercise, while others were combing their hair. The Persian spy watched them in astonishment. Xerxes was bewildered. Indeed, he didn't want much from them. The burning question is, what would explain this behavior where the night before you're going to battle, when you know you're going to die most likely? You spend your time combing your hair or getting a workout. Doesn't make much sense. Xerxes didn't want that much. Let me see. This is what he was asking them. See?
All that God accusations requires is this, a simple, often earth and water, spoken as far as submission to the will of Jesus. Submission. Now that's a bit of a problem. So rumor has it, the Athenians have already done it. We must be diplomatic. And of course, Spartans. Choose your next year's carefully. They may be your last. Madman. You're a madman. Ask and walk. But you'll find plenty of gold down there. No man. Persian or Greek, no man threatens a messenger. You blame your sons and heads of the humble kings the lies that you steps. And you cite my spirit. You threaten my people with slavery and death. Oh, I've chosen my words carefully, Persian. Perhaps you wish to do the same. Disgusting. This is madness. This is Sparta!
So there you have it. What explains this behavior? Xerxes is not asking for very much. Just submit to my rulership. You can live your everyday life as you do every day. Nothing will change. You're just my subjects. I will help you to fight your enemies. But they decide, no, we're going to actually go and fight you, even if it looks like it's a losing battle. How can we explain this? Again, Xerxes couldn't just get his head around these Greek values. He just didn't get it. Let's get in their shoes. Although I think I'm not much too big to fit in them. Because as we see, the values they embrace are to such an extent that I think most of us will be happy to get simply close to it. Again, picture this. You're going to die tomorrow. And you actually decide to either comb your hair and make it look pretty, or let's go for a last workout. Now, Spartans were weird, but not in that way. What they acted in that way had to do with the values they embraced. Again, imagine further that your own country is going to be about to be conquered. And suppose the Canadians, who are so close to you, decide to recover the U.S. and they already crossed the border. Huge army coming up to take over. And you decide to actually mind the Olympic Games. You send 7,000 warriors who you know will die because you want to celebrate those 3 days of the Games, and then we'll fight after that. That's mind-boggling. Nothing in this country will make you stop for anything like that, unless, of course, maybe it's American Idol in the final. But beyond that, and that's not what it's about us, right? The fact is that what happened 2,500 years ago, those 3 days of Thermopylae, begs to be explained, because it tells you of a way of thinking of life which is very hard to understand, but there's much to learn. And this, I are going to argue, is going to help us also understand the Olympic Games and how they can be improved. Okay? So taking our hot run or rib shield to get through the gates, let me tell you the structure of this talk very quickly. First of all, there are 4 reasons why I want to go through Thermopylae. The first one is, this was a burning, defining moment in the West. You have no Thermopylae, there will be no Greek culture, no Western culture as we know it. We would actually embrace Persian values, which are very different. To bring this to our topic, instead of celebrating the Olympic Games, we would be celebrating hunting, which is what Persians like to do in their pastime. Very different. Secondly, it's a sizzling irony. Think about it. The Spartans were supposed to be the most fearsome warriors of ancient world. Yet, they are remembered by a defeat. Third, there's this ardent idealism. Why they died, even though they knew it was just to hold them for 3 days, was for an ideal, for something they believed in. The kind of ideal we're going to see that is replicated by athletes in ancient games, and hopefully some of them in modern times. And last, is also artistic sculpture. It's about poetry, painting, literature, and of course movies. So why not philosophy? I think it's a very good reason to do philosophy with these people as well. Now, there are going to be 3 citations from Herodotus, who was the father of history, to anchor this. The first one we've already seen, the one about combing their hair. Why I chose him is because he was the first historian. He got the business of history going as a narrative that tries to inquire as to the reasons and causes of things. And what he focused on actually was the Persian Wars. The 3 moments I've chosen, I think, are actually much more powerful than anything the movie has to show. The movie shows wonderful battles, but the citations I've chosen from his text show us people that are much more inspiring than that. There are going to be also 2 themes here. 3 virtues I'm going to talk about. Arete, which means excellence, courage, and kalam, which means honorable beauty, or something like that. I'll speak about this more later on. And then I want to actually try to argue how Thermopylae illuminates sport and how sport illuminates Thermopylae. And last, there's going to be one message from the oracle. Confusing as they all are, but hopefully inspiring as well. Let's get going. First of all, the Greeks had a tragic sense of life. For nothing they invented tragedy. They also invented comedy. Don't forget that. Okay? But think about the kind of life they had. It was about warfare all the time. They would fight the Myrmidons on Monday, the Thracians on Thursday, still alive on Sunday, you fight the Scythians, and then the Persians every few years. They're always in warfare. Against each other, against other peoples. They also had a sense of the fate taking away control from their hands. Fate struck rich and poor, healthy and unhealthy, those who were good or bad, alike, without caring for them all the time. So it was all about the whims of the gods. They weren't in control either. But to this world, the Greeks had a sunny temperament. They were optimists. Like I said, they had tragedy and comedy. And to balance this, they actually brought a certain outlook into life. Keller says, they balanced the calamities with the keenest appetite for activity of all kinds. Physical, mental, emotional, a never-ending delight in doing things, in seeing how they were done. They delighted in life. And this temperament helped them to cope with the situation. They fought this uncertainty with reason, logos, the arts, we talked about tragedy already, and of course athletics. Now how did the sports help them with this? It's very interesting, you think about it. Athletic contests gave them a measure of control. However remote this control might be, just like a remote control, okay? They actually felt that with athletic contests, they were actually in control for a measure of the time, if anything. They took great pains to keep objective conditions for their contests, from the starting lines to the finishing lines to all the conditions that surrounded the contest. And that's what they made the distinction between athletics, for example, running or javelin throw or weights, and those contests were really dependent maybe sometimes on luck, like horse racing. They were different. In some of them you could actually be more in control. And athletics allowed them to do this. Why? Because they could actually determine who was the winner without chance or luck or other influences from the guys or somebody else. In this realm, as long as we apply this, however small it is, we felt we actually had something to say. We had a say into how things take over. And there were 3 things they got from here. First of all, this is exemplified their excellence, which we are going to have a lot to say in the next few slides. Okay? But it was a way of trying to show who was best under what conditions. Secondly, it was about testing the truth, as Reid argues. In athletic context, if you think about it, it's a matter of trying to determine who's best today under equal conditions. There's no ifs and buts. It's not like throwing the dice and see what happens. It depends on your efforts, your talents. And it's very much philosophical because it's about truth finding. Who's the best? And last, it was also a tribute to the gods. And what better way to give a tribute to the gods than with your pain and your effort? Not some easy coins you throw in a little purse, but actually through your painful exertions. This is what the Greeks found was the best way to celebrate. And that's why the Olympics were connected with religious festivals. Moving on, and speaking of all this issue of the pain and so on, the defeat and agony of victory, the Olympics started somewhere in the 8th century BC. Very contested, it's not very clear, that's not important, but the issue is that it coincided with the flourishing of Greek life across all levels. From the arts, to politics, to military affairs, to philosophy, and of course athletics. All of these coalesce into a sense of being Greek and being unique in the world. And that's what they set out to defend against Xerxes. And to the front of this was competition. It pushes way to the front of Greek values very, very quickly. For them, they loved to make all kinds of contests. Any excuse was good enough to touch somebody who was better. And the notion of agony, think of what it means for us, painful, comes actually from the word agora, which means an open space where people met to discuss things. How so? Well, you think about it, okay? Athletics involves the public display of agony of your efforts. You can hide when you're hurting very much in a race or something like that. And it's for everybody else to see. So athletic context gave them the chance to show publicly their effort, their exertions, their pain. And that's how I got connected. The pain of the athletic effort with the public display of it. And the objective conditions that we talked about already to determine who was a winner, who wasn't a winner. Okay? Whoever thought of no pain, no gain was definitely a Greek stock, I think. Yet again, and not to be confused, no all pain is gain. The point being, just because you suffer, doesn't mean you will gain. On the other side, I'm sure you've heard of Nike, right? Just do it. Well, it's very appropriate because Nike, where Nike comes from, actually means a victory predicated on effort and struggle and pain. So everything comes connected, so to speak. Now, with all this pain, asking, were athletics popular in ancient Greece? Is actually like asking, are koalas cute? I don't particularly like them, but most people find koalas cute, right? Likewise in ancient Greece, okay? Pretty much every little village lost in the mountains, no matter what, had at least one or several festivals, where the center of life was actually athletic contest. That was the fun part. Okay, there are hundreds of them. And to kind of get into something very quickly, and as we go through with regard to modern Olympics, a few years ago, before most of you were actually probably born, the big issue was, should we be amateur or professional in the Olympic Games? Well, there may be good reasons as to why they should be amateur or not. But what you cannot do is actually try to argue that ancient Greece validates the notion of Greek Olympics should be, or the Olympics nowadays should be amateur. Why? Because they have professional athletes. With hundreds of events, winners actually stood to win a lot of money, or the equivalent of money, so to speak. Another honor, okay? Those who argue for amateurism, they are thinking of amateurs in terms of those who were from noble origin, or gentleman status in England in the Victorian time, versus those who have to work for a living. And that's where I came up with this idea that separated things in terms of class. It was an issue of class that had nothing to do with ancient Greece. Very different, okay? And in fact, as Young says, those who actually made the circuit could stand to become as rich as, Lance Armstrong, Tiger Woods. Well, maybe these days he's a little poor, but it doesn't matter, And some other people. They made a lot of money. Just to give an example, a young kid who might have been 13, 14 and won a race might stand to win maybe the equivalent of $30,000 for a race. And that's just a young kid. Imagine somebody who was a little older. They would actually win maybe $300,000 or $500,000, the equivalent of money, nowadays money, for one race. So some of them actually became professionals. That's how they made their living. Okay? That's just a side issue. The point is, that the effort that required for athletics and so on was actually appreciated very much so by Greek culture and rewarded. That's why they get so much money to it. So, agon, the key idea here is this: beauty and honor is earned through suffering and risk. And this they embrace wholeheartedly. Now, just so you know that I actually walk the talk, very briefly, this is me doing a race in Tucson, Arizona. And here we're going about 8%, which is pretty steep. We started 100 of us in this race. And after the climb comes the descent. After the suffering comes the risk. A very difficult descent where people usually crash, because it has all kinds of blind turns and so on. So, and why you do this? Not for the money, just for the fun of it, really. And we'll see why this is engaged in the next few slides. Now, you have to feed all these exertions very, very well. So, let me actually give you another citation. Good heavens, what kinds of men are these you have brought us to fight against? Men who compete with one another not for material reward, but only for honor. This is what the general says to Xerxes, and he gets really, really angry. why do we react in this way? I'm already sick enough of these ancient Greeks. Okay? But, to show you a little clip, if it's working, here we go.
Okay. Your breakfast will be hot. But tonight, we dine in hell.
So, very short and sweet. Like I told you, tonight they may be dining in hell. But Greek diet was very, very wholesome and very tasty. Okay? So there's some advantage to that, okay? And yes, as Greek was very, very good. Their ethical diet was actually more wholesome and awesome, if you will. To do this, I'm going to be telling you a couple of things. Let's look to the cuisine of Aristotle. And very briefly, I'll give you some more insights on the next slide. But for now, it's centered on the notion of a virtue, which told you, what was your character made up of? What was your metal? This acted as your guiding light, so to speak. You followed what a virtue was, and you were assured to have a good character, to build it. And it was based in the mean between two extremes, an excess and a deficiency. I will illustrate with courage in the next slide. For now, I just want to tell you what we're looking at very briefly, and it's this. First of all, the goal of all of this, the bullseye, was eudaimonia, which is the notion of a flourishing life, which ultimately has to be completed at the end of your life for Aristotle. But it's a work in progress. You have these ideas you work towards, which are the excellence and so on that you're aiming for, and that's supposed to make your life better than otherwise. Okay? Another point I want to mention is that for the Greeks, the notion of community was central to this. All of this that didn't make sense to them, and it was together with their polis, the city-state, with the other citizens of the state. It wasn't simply about me and my values. It was about all those values all of us embraced together. That's why the worst punishment you could give to a Greek citizen was actually to ostracize him, to send him outside of the community with the beasts, or making him a slave. Okay? Now, there are three virtues we're going to be chewing on for the next slide. The first one is excellence. The next one is manliness or courage. And the third one is noble beauty. These three, I think, are what concoct this recipe that I'm going to argue is what makes the Olympics, could make them, much more interesting than they are nowadays. And let's go back to ancient Greece. So, first of all, arete excellence. It's supposed to be a skill, prowess, nobility, valor, much more than that. Okay? The third, in the sense of you earn the right to something, is what you've actually earned rightfully through your efforts. Now, some like Ricky in Talladega Nights have a written idea of what is supposed to be this excellence. He pisses in the morning, right? It's a lot harder than this. Think of the model from the army, be all you can be. Well, this is the pessimist expectations version compared to the Greeks. Why? Because for them, embodying excellence meant to try to be the best you could be every morning, every day, every moment that every activity you can think of. Whether it was politics, the arts, going to the workout track, no matter what, they always try to do the best. Of course, it doesn't mean that every Greek did this, but this is what they aim as an ideal. This is what actually inspired them, if you will. Okay? So that's what you keep in mind. The idea was this. They gave them their reason for being. The next one I want to talk about is courage or manliness. And with this, I'm going to exemplify how the virtue ethics from Aristotle works out. First of all, we have the mean between, and why I have here macho man is because these were macho times. Think about it. It was our warfare. So for them, being courageous was being able to stand up in battle against the enemy. You depended on the guy next to you, because if one of them buckled, then the whole thing was lost. And that's how battles were won or lost. I'll tell you more about the martial aspect of this in a couple of slides. But as far as courage, remember, it was a mean between two vices. On the one side, and this is supposed to be, of course, the mean, we've got cowardliness. You just don't have what it takes. You fold your cards. On the other side, you've got recklessness. You do something crazy and stupid. That's not being courageous. It's being nuts, right? But think of how this connects with arete very clearly. Unless you have the guts to do what it takes, you're not going to be willing to risk to pursue your excellence. Because for ancient Greeks, when you lost, whether in the battlefield or in athletics, you were actually publicly shamed. It was not simply, well, I got second today, I'll try again next weekend. There was no next weekend. It was actually hard after that to kind of come back from either being cast as a coward or not measuring up. But yet, they relied in giving their best. That's what, it was all about, trying to be courageous. And last, I want to talk about Kalon, which is what I want to talk about in terms of honorable beauty. It's about being noble in a beautiful way. And the best example I can think of is somebody called Eugenio Monti, Il Rosso Volante, an Italian who did sledding in the Olympics. And in the 63 Olympics, this is going to exemplify, I think, Jalón in the best possible way. Not once, but twice, he actually lent help to opposing teams. Because he said, without my help, they won't be able to compete. As chance has it, of course, those teams actually took the goal from him. But he was willing to help them because he thought, if I don't compete against the best, there is no honor in that beauty, or beauty in that win. I want to make sure that they are in the best condition to try to compete against me. And if they win, they were best on that day. What can I say? Not many people would do that, but he was willing to actually put his values in front of his ambition in a beautiful way, I think. So you can choose to have, the values of Ricky Thermopylae or somebody like Monti, Il Rosso Volante. Moving on. Let's look a little bit at the dark side of arete. Very quickly. Of course, the ancient Greeks didn't just compete for honor. They wanted money, fame, reputation, and of course, there were cheaters among them. What do you do with that? Well, a couple of things. To the rescue comes Homer and the Iliad. You know what the Iliad is about, right? Agamemnon trying to, of course, goes back to Helen, but that's just an excuse to try to actually conquer Troy. Okay? And in this book, there are two moments that I think are going to help us combat the first charge that the Greeks didn't compete just for honor. First of all, and this is the Orkan of Homer, tells you, hey, do you know of Antilochus and Achilles? Let me tell you about them. Antilochus competed in a games for Patroclus, who was Achilles' beloved, so to speak. And he had won a particular prize in a chariot race. But Achilles gives it to somebody else, to Nestor. And depending on what you think of, on your test, the scabbard is either in the right place or the wrong place for you. But anyway, moving on. The idea is this, he said, hey, you gave my prize that I rightfully earned to somebody else. I won't have any of this. Eventually, Achilles actually retracted and gave him the horse, the mare. And then Homer might say, well, it reminds me also what happened between Achilles and Agamemnon, even before that problem. Over somebody called Briseis, a sexy vestal, that Achilles had his heart set up on. What happened was Agamemnon decided to take the beautiful vestal and keep it to himself. And Achilles got very, very upset, so much so, and he said, I'm not going to fight for you guys. I'm going to go on vacation. And they almost lost the war. Agamemnon then says, well, talking to Nestor, I better give her up because otherwise we're going to lose the war because of his tantrum. Okay? Of course he gets the girl in the end. But the issue here is this. It wasn't about the girl or the horse. The issue was about the fact that they were symbols for what they prized, their arete. It could have been a pebble. It could have been something completely worthless. As long as it was a symbol of their excellence. That's what they were fighting for, both Antilochus and Achilles in this case. And this is, since Achilles is busy with Briseis, this is where our turtle overtakes Achilles in the race. And I think after this, we won't see him again. Now, with the issue of cheating, and we know cheaters, a few of them more or less famous, right? This is how they dealt with cheaters in ancient Greece. They were flogged in a polite way. Why? Because for a Greek citizen, it wasn't so much about, the father gets some massages on the back and it hurts. But because it was a very emotionally, psychologically difficult punishment. They were extremely proud of being free. And you only flogged slaves or animals. So flogging was a symbol, again, of them not being free and not being citizens. Just like arete was a symbol of their excellence. So this is how they decided to punish them. And why they actually, most of them, try to mind their ways in this regard. Now, and before we move on, I want to tell you a bit about martial aspects of their life. I'm going to tell you about hoplite warfare and a lesson to be learned from that. And then I'm going to talk about two kinds of values, instrumental and non-instrumental. And then we'll discuss finally the competition in the modern Olympics. Okay? First, shield against shield. Imagine what it was like to try to go into battle facing a Greek phalanx, which is the way they usually fought. 8 ranks deep, sometimes more, Thermopylae up to 70 ranks deep, all your men in a little, in a little cliff, so to speak. Well, what they have is you see a bunch of spears facing you. You're going to become impaled in this if you run against it, okay? These are shields made up of bronze, each of them weighing 20 to 30 pounds. Very solid. That's why the Persians didn't have a chance. They have weaker shields. Very, very short little spears. And they use arrows most of the time, which have nothing to do with these shields. So they made mincemeat of them. Greek armies were actually the most fearsome armies of the time in the West for a reason. They fought together as a unit, and they withstood most of the time. However, that didn't last forever, as we know. They were bested. Somebody called Philosophers decide, I think I can improve on this if I use the terrain differently. If I make the shields smaller and the spears longer, I may make actually even worse, for my enemy. So he decided to just do that. This is Epictetus' versions. And with this, Philip of Macedon and Hypata's son Alexander actually conquered the Greeks. Now, the lesson from this is this. Unless you want to become a shish kebab, you better actually engage Greek values critically. And that's what I'm going to do in the next few slides. Not simply say, arete is great, and so is Calon, and so is courage, beautiful. It's just, what do I sign up? We have to say, well, how are we going to adapt those to our values these days? And this is how we're going to adapt it. First of all, we need to do a little more heavy philosophy here. Let's talk about non-instrumental values, okay? Something is non-instrumental when you appreciate that person, that event, that animal, that thing for who or what they are. For example, if you like to play tennis, you do for a lot of the game. If you like the economy of movement, the precision, the fact that it's like a mental chess, it has to do with how it is played that makes you enjoy it, okay? Goals, trying to win, to bet the other person, are okay. But the issue is on the struggle, on how it is done. It's not so much in the fact that you get to win or not. And you're less likely to cheat because the rules make up the game. That's what makes tennis interesting. If I use a cannonball to shoot at my opponent, well, sure, I can beat him, but I'm not playing tennis. That's not what makes it fun. Instrumental values, on the other side, use others as means. This sounds very Kantian for those of you who know Kant. Okay? You play tennis because the white looks good on your skin, or because this is great to pick up dates, maybe. But it has nothing to do with the game itself. Of course, it doesn't mean that they are at odds with each other, as we'll talk about, but in this case, you can see which ones are going to get us to enjoy the activity for its own sake, so to speak. If you go swimming, instrumentally, it's because you actually like to win against the resistance of the water. That's a challenge you set yourself, and that's what you enjoy. You use a scooter, you're not actually doing swimming, are you? Now, those who actually use drugs, I argue, are actually using scooters in disguise. They pretend to be actually being excellent in their training, in their effort. So this guy, supposedly, if he's doing drugs compared to this other guy, it's like if we're having a scooter. This person thinks, oh, he's simply more talented. He's trained hard at it. What he doesn't know is that he's using a little engine that nobody knows about. And that's why drugs and so on undercut the very values on which sport is built in this regard. And they are very, very damaging in that regard. Let me give you also the idea is of, like I mentioned, it's not that I have to choose either these values or those. They work together most of the time. But if you had to choose, which one would you choose? Most people, when their wallet is at stake or their effort, tend to go this way. Well, let me see if I can win. Let's take shortcuts. Well, I was just in the heat of the moment. The litmus test is this. Are you willing to let go of all your efforts for the sake of the rules of the game themselves? And the best example I can think of is by a Japanese coach, Shinzo Kido. In the 1913 Olympics, he was short of one hurdle to win the event, the gold medal. Just one jump and he had the gold medal assured. When he noticed that his horse faltered, something was wrong with the horse. Now most people would say, well, one hurdle, let's go. And I get my medal. He actually stopped the race up there and lost. He didn't get his medal because he did not want to hurt his horse. These values don't pertain only to people or things, also to animals. He actually showed that he cared more about these values more deeply than the dream of Olympic gold. And again, put yourself in his shoes. You worked all these years, 4, 8, 10 years or more, trying to get this gold medal. And for one instant, he actually lets this go. This is definitely one of those beautiful column moments, I think. Now, as far as competition, I think this is the Achilles heel for the Greek culture. Okay? We talked about arete excellence and how they competed for everything, beautiful. But let's do a little critical philosophy here. They believed in this agonic and archaic view of competition, archaic from arete of excellence, where the idea was this. In the Olympic Games and most other things, there was only one winner, and everybody else was a loser. If you're not winning, you're just a loser. This is the notion of a zero-sum game for competition. And Lombardi, everything is about the win, actually lends itself to this misuse. You're more likely to cheat because only the end matters. Only the victory. Everything else falls by the wayside. Okay? And this is very harsh in the sense that what it brings is a very harsh ethic where everybody is seen as a loser. Think of how we tend to think in this country when somebody doesn't win. Oh, they're just an also run. Forget about it. You got your goal, we celebrate them. They lose very much like the Greeks. Forget about them. They are no good. Okay? There is also on the other side a recreational view of competition where it's about having a good time. Let's suppose you show up to the Olympics to do the 100-meter butterfly. You jump in the water and you float like a cork. Win, lose, sink, it doesn't matter. This is not very inspirational. It's about having a good time. The balance between them, I think, is going to be found in a view that looks at competition as collaboration. Nothing changes from how you do things, but everything changes. You see your opponent as somebody who's helping you achieve your goals. You share a goal. So if he's somebody from a different team, this is the World Championship of Triathlon, by the way, in Vancouver, you actually help him because it's, hey, if he loses or he doesn't beat me because he gets, it's not kind of trouble I could have helped. Do I deserve that win or not? Going back to those issues we're talking about. In this case, you actually need others to be the best you can be. They push you. And that's what actually gives value to your win. You engage the ability to best of your talent, so to speak, and in this way, you also help each other by pushing and trying to best each other. So instead of thinking of the others as means, you think that they are actually enhancing your victory. This is Cecil Healy, a swimmer, who also, I think, exemplifies some of these values we're talking about. At our Olympic Games as well, he actually argued to allow for the U.S. team, which was late for the final, to compete. He stood to win the 100 meters freestyle. He argued to allow him in, and he lost to a Hawaiian, the gold medal. But he said, you know what, I didn't want to win unless I was competing against the best. That was all my interest. That value, again, that meant I wouldn't be worth that much. Okay? Now, as far as the modern Olympics, I want to focus on the modern games on records. This is something that there is a big emphasis. Think of Phelpsmania. Everything is about the records. And we're trying to beat a little number or how many medals, okay? And this makes actually instrumental use of the Olympics. It's not about what the Olympics are, a celebration of effort and beauty in contests, but it's about some abstraction of numbers. So you contrast the elite performance, what happened there and then, that could be epic, for just a few little numbers. Okay? Let me see. No, it's not working. So let's try it this way. Okay. There is two reasons why I wanted to show this piece on Usain Bolt. Okay? First of all, you might say, isn't this actually ill-inspired to use Usain Bolt, who is actually beating records right and left, to try to exemplify that maybe you are too obsessed with records? But a couple of things is just slow down again as a philosopher. Okay? And you know a little more about what happens with him. Think about it. He does beat records, but when he actually got the gold medal at the Olympics, people complain and had to justify in interviews. Why did you slow down? Why is you celebrating so early? You lost some time. You could have done maybe 200 seconds less, or a lot more than that. He actually said, you know what? I was enjoying myself, and I want the public to enjoy my performance. It wasn't so much about the numbers. He wasn't concerned. He was about the performance itself. Does it really matter when you see this much of a difference between the first and second, whether it's 100th or 1,000th of a second? Not really. We get hung up on numbers as there's something magical about it, but they're anything but inspiring. What inspires us is the lead performance, what happened that evening, that day, somebody running so much faster than everybody else. That's what we find uplifting. Records as numbers are for accountants, maybe, but not for sport narratives. And that's why I've chosen actually to use Usain Bolt in this regard. Why I chose also that clip is because they speak of Buffalo Soldier. This is about soldiers. And the Buffalo Soldiers were those black soldiers who fought in Indian wars, who actually tried to excel, upheld standards of honor as well. Okay, so that's another connection for that. Moving on, some people have argued, Lolan, that actually the notion of records is unsustainable. You think about it, it's predicated on something that is limited, our capacity to go ever faster. Right? Eventually, our ability, genetically speaking, is going to reach an end. At which point you can only get faster if you change the rules of the game, the equipment, and other things. But unless you cannot compare records to records, it becomes nonsensical then. Okay? So he's argued eventually we're running out of room for records, and what happens there? Sports won't be interesting anymore. You move on to other things. It's actually happened with some practices when there was, for example, a Japanese archer, where there used to be people in Japan in the 16th century trying to shoot arrows through a little target. People go to a temple, let's see how many arrows can I put through there. 300, 1,000, wow. Well, somebody went there and shot 70,000 times, non-stop for 24 hours, through the target. Nobody ever tried after that. The practice died. Because who's going to best that anyway? What's the interest in that? Yeah, great. It's done and over with. Okay? So he argues that maybe we should actually look for alternatives for our Olympics. Instead of being on measurement and objective measurements of speed, just let's see who's best on that day in different courses. Make them longer or shorter, uphill with different kind of, consistency in the ground. Just for some ideas. Okay? The emphasis against it on the process, the struggle, the effort, not the actual numbers. Records are recorded, but feats are feted and celebrated. Think of Pistorius. Like a comedian put it, he runs on paper clips. But think of how inspiring is somebody who should actually be sitting in a wheelchair, being able to actually beat athletes who are able and who train for it. This is the kind of performance I'm talking about that are inspiring. And again, this is how the instrumental collaboration model applies to the Olympics. This applies to other models and other things. So think about it. Now, trying to go to a close, back to Thermopylae very quickly. The last third citation is, go tell the Spartans, you who read, we took their orders, here lie dead. Again, this tells us of a sense of values, of heroism, with this regards death or risk, okay? Because they have a view of life that's very inspiring, okay? Now, the best way to explain this, I think, I'm going to use a philosopher from Spain called José Ortega y Gasset. He has two of his ideas. They're extremely rich. And to give you a very quick background on him, he was like an existentialist on Prozac. Instead of being dark, he was very happy. And he thought that life was something exuberant, worth celebrating. Very much like the Greeks. That's why you will see, actually, he thought of two ideas, okay? First of all, this notion of life, where you're willing to risk everything for what you believe in, is best embodied by warriors and by athletes. How? Two ideas. There are two ways of living in life, he actually argued. One of them was an utilitarian one. What's in it for me? You only do something because you expect a payout. So, okay, I'll work on that part. What grade am I going to get out of it? For my efforts. I want to know before I put my effort, what am I going to win? And then you also have the festive and sportive way of looking at life, where you feel away energy, very much like people have fun. You don't expect anything in return. You just do it. You're willing to risk. You take on enterprises, not just having fun, but things you really care deeply about. And you're willing to actually risk fame, money, effort, energy, whatever, just to have a chance to make it happen. That's what's inspiring, according to him. And the sport is the best example of superfluous effort, because you think about it, when you're doing a sport, yeah, you do it for a sport. What do you get from a workout? Unless you're a professional, not really very much. Everything is in the effort you spend there, but it's because you enjoy it. It's the notion of doing something without expecting anything in return. That's very inspiring, okay? In this regard, we risk life because and in the measure in which we value it. Or to say with Keto, the values that are most worth living for are the worth dying for. It's not really about dying, okay? But it's about risking things for things you care about, to try to find things about yourself. This is me, by the way, when I was a little younger, and a little faster, and probably a little crazier. But the idea as to how this works is this. The virtuous diet of these three virtues, explains the Spartans' athletes' behavior and values. And are instrumental, this is an irony, in what? In bettering the modern games, I think. Okay? It's not so much about risking your life, but it's really about willing to put your values and risk, your effort for nothing. Now, to bring this to a close, the oracle, which, as you all know, this is what the Greeks went when they were in trouble. Trying to find, what do I do? And they will come with really cryptic sayings that you have to interpret. This is one of them. No government will hand from your neck, no olive wreath will crown you, yet you will attain victory. Apocryphal, meaning it's made up, okay? It's not real. Now, if we have to make a crack at this is what I think it means. There are three virtues, excellence, courage, and beauty, in terms of honor, that intertwine in collaboration in a sporting, non-instrumental, and exuberant sense of life. Or to put it with Camus, as he reflects on Sisyphus, the absurd hero, the struggle to achieve the process itself should be enough to fill a person's heart. And I want to close this with a poem that a friend of mine, a colleague, Cesar Torres, just sent to me this afternoon with regard to Thermopylae, which I think encapsulates everything we've talked about this afternoon. Honor to those who in the life they lead define and guard a Thermopylae. Never betraying what is right, consistent and just in all they do, but showing pity also and compassion, generous when they're rich and when they're poor, still generous in small ways, still helping as much as they can, always speaking the truth, yet without hating those who lie. And even more honor is due to them when they foresee, as many do foresee, that if Ethiotis, this is the traitor who actually led to the Spartans' demise at the end, will turn up in the end to the Medes, the Persians, will break through after all. You have any burning questions and comments? I'm happy to entertain them. Thank you very much.
I have 15 minutes to repeat all that.
Sure, no problem. Maybe backwards even.
Expand on the canoe reflecting on Sisyphus. Could you expand on the canoe reflecting on Sisyphus quote?
Thank you. Yeah, this is actually part of the paper that's buried. I make reference to Camus and Sisyphus through the paper, actually, through the chapter, and it comes at the end because I want to reflect that, and that's a very good comment. If you think about Sisyphus, who exemplifies, this guy is pushing a rock for no reason. That's what he's being condemned to, right? Now, the way Camus spins it is, well, he's trying to think of a view of life which is completely nonsense, and what is he doing that for? Is there anything to worth embracing there? And how does Camus conclude his essay? By saying, I think we must imagine Sisyphus happy. How do you imagine him happy? Well, Camus finds that in hubris, hatred of the gods. You give me this fate, and I'm going to say to the gods, screw you, I can do better than you can. I just do it for the hell of it. But I think sports are even more inspiring. Because, just like I was arguing, think of sports. You do something because you enjoy that activity. Think of the kind of things you like to do in your hobbies every day, whether it's running, swimming, going to get a workout, playing golf, reading books. When you do something intrinsically, the effort you put into it may go nowhere. But they cannot take it away from you, can they? It's meaningful in itself. In this regard, I think sports could be a model for Camus and Sisyphus, in which he could embrace his fate. If you really got into rock pushing, well, not like that if you put it up, but you give it the right context. You describe it as maybe some kind of athletic struggle. Just because. Well, it may be much more meaningful. Just the other day when I bike ride here on Saturday, which was very, very windy, if you notice to be outside there, 30-mile winds, and I'm pushing into the wind, onto the end. Where is all there for going? It's like my rock, so to speak. I know it'll be a tailwind eventually, hopefully, but actually turn into a headwind when I come back. So there wasn't such a thing. But the point was, I enjoyed the biking, the pain itself. It didn't matter. It was about that's what I was looking for anyway. I'm not going to complain or anything like that. So in this regard, I think sports, in particular, these kind of values, for you something non-instrumental because you happen to love it, is much more enriching and inspiring than trying to always find a practical angle or meaning in that regard. Does this kind of answer your question, or? Okay, thank you. Very good question. I guess you're convinced now, right? You're going to go out there and try to do the best you can, everything you do, no matter what, right? From the parking, all right, make sure that, I get the best parking job ever to, no matter what, tie your shoes. But this is how you live there, right? The point was you create a habit of trying to be the best you can no matter what. You see? It's very hard to do and to embrace. And like I mentioned, though, it can be taken to extreme, right? Think of arete, excellence, only the winners count. So you always want to be really careful not to get too carried away. But there is something worth, I think, inspiring. Now think of how this could be used to employ or to improve the Olympics nowadays. Think of all the ills that I mentioned, right? From nationalism medals to issues having to do with, drugs, cheating, gender bias. Well, if you embrace the Olympics in a different framework of concepts, which is not just about winning per se, I think you're going to get different games. Very different games, but I think they'll be much more interesting because the narratives will be about feats, not simply, we got so many medals, whoopee. How many medals you just got 8 years ago? Those things are very, very quick. People don't forget the performances, though. They still talk about Bob Beamon in Mexico jumping 28 feet or whatever, 30 feet, like a kangaroo or something like that. So, yes.
Jesus, I have a question. How self-conscious were the Greeks of these virtues? I mean, in retrospect, several millennia later, we have Aristotle, we analyze,
Yeah.
we find commonality with Plato, and we look at Homer, which was not, which was much more in flux at the time than we think of it. So, how much would the soldiers have said, these are the reasons why we're doing this, and how much was this just sort of unconscious and cultural?
That's a very good question, and trying to do psychology remotely is very difficult. So I'm going to approach this philosophically, maybe, instead of psychologically, because I cannot get in their heads. But however, that's why I chose those citations, and that's why I had this framework, trying to make sense as to why would these people do these kinds of actions? Did they actually think this way? Who will make it possible? And to do this, the background to this talk and the paper also is my own experience as an athlete and as a philosopher. Trying to see why they do these kinds of things and what would explain this kind of behavior, all in all. So back then, I cannot claim to be in the head of Leonidas or one of these people, right? But if we slow down enough to think, what would motivate me to behave as they were doing? How much was it conscious or unconscious? And think about the forces that are operating within ourselves in this world as well. The values we espouse consciously and unconsciously. Most of you are probably very proud of being individualists, you know? You think most of you, like most of my students, believe that you have a say in your fate, that you're responsible for your actions and you have a free choice. But most of these values are actually, for most of us, embraced because they come with the culture we're from. Same thing with the Greeks, I guess, you know. It's built into them from the moment they are little Spartans or Athenians to when they're older. Well, you're one with your community, of course. So to some extent, much of it was, I want to say, unless they were philosophers, and they came later, right, unconscious. At the same time, it doesn't mean that some of them didn't choose willfully. I think some of them might be more thoughtful to embrace this, willingly or not. And for those who wanted to reflect, and I think, for example, Herodotus gives us the chance. The kind of things he actually reflects on, trying to explain the behavior of his countrymen or the Persians, gives us some insights into the philosophical psychology behind this. Why would we behave this way? Well, because they believe these things, which they embrace. They saw them working, flourishing, helping them flourish. I do think that in spite of all these unconscious aspects, they chose to pursue excellence in a very willful way. Nobody made them work so hard at it, but they actually chose to actually pursue it. They tried it, and they said, let's go for it. So I think there's something to be said to the fact that these values, once people try them, it's like having a good dessert. I like it. I want some more of it. Even though it might come at the effort of some money or a lot of hard work, maybe. Trying to get a value into place. But people actually, I think, see things that work and things that don't work. And those values help them flourish as a people at the time. So I think to that regard, to that extent, they embrace that quite willfully, I would think. I would argue anyway. Yes, Chelsea.
Were these virtues present only in Greeks' interactions with other Greeks, or whether they have been apparent in their interactions with, say, the Persians in war, which could be seen as like the ultimate competition?
Wonderful. Very good question and very difficult. Now, a couple of things. And this is one of the ways in which you can criticize Greeks. Think about it. They were very partial as to how to apply things, right? Who were citizens in the Greeks? Only males. Women belonging to the gymnasium, back in the house, cooking and so on, right? Unless you were in Sparta, and you have, of course, Spartan women who need to be strong to have strong babies, being the exception for a change, okay? But most of the time, if you were not Greek, and by being Greek male and citizen, you didn't count as much. You were a slave, an animal, or maybe a Persian, even worse, right? So to some extent, the stakes weren't the same if you were looking at non-Greeks. You could flog an animal, or a slave, or a Persian. You couldn't flog another Greek citizen without insulting him. So these virtues applied only to the Greeks as far as, of course you could choose to be magnanimous or helpful to, maybe you felt sorry for a Persian maybe, but that went beyond your duty, I guess. Not that they thought in terms of duty, but to put it in moral terms. I think they kept this to themselves. So easy way to fix this, of course, to make it more universal or applicable to more people, not simply based on having to be, a male who's, particular age, et cetera, right? So I think that's an easy way to get culturally critical, yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Shandorian on the web who asks, and I will read this. Perhaps a similar event to the 300 movie may be the March of Death, a legendary game of soccer played during the Nazi occupation of Kiev. The Kiev team, FC Start, was leading at the end of the first half 3-1 against the German team. During halftime, the German officials warned the Kiev players, quote, not to dare to win. FC Start won the game despite that, and all the players were tortured and killed in the end. This was a problem of nationality and politics interfering with sport. So the question is, how can we prevent these issues to interfere with from interfering with the intrinsic value of the Olympics? So the question is telling the story about the Kiev team insisting that they win despite their orders, and this is a problem of nationality and politics. Is it possible to prevent these sorts of things from interfering with the virtues that you're talking about?
Well, when you mix politics and warfare, as you did with the person in your question, Chelsea, things are complicated very quickly. In principle, it's not impossible. It's not logically impossible to prevent that from happening. Now, whether this framework could prevent that from happening, I think the way these people operated, when they actually decided to win regardless, if they were going to be killed or not, again, embraces some of these values we're talking about. It wasn't so much the game they were playing, it was a symbol of who they were and who they were playing or fighting for. It was a matter of showing this is what we are made up of, right? So in this case, of course, you think about it, this is using instrumentally sport for the ends of politics. Both the Germans were trying to use the game for political ends, just like they tried to do with the 36 Olympics. Now, these narratives, the epics you get out of that, what they mean are very different. And I think to some extent, the closer you get to embracing these values not instrumentally, the farther away you get from this misuse by the politics or martial uses of your ideas. I think that's the short answer I have to that question. Very good question. Yes.
I'm curious about the 300 Spartan warriors, and my question is more of a sociological one.
Sure.
Could you give us a brief synopsis of, it's my understanding that the 300 warriors were defeated by the Persians due to certain numbers and attrition, but they are recognized, I think, remembered for preserving Western culture. I was wondering if you could explain that process.
Yeah, very interesting question. A couple of things. What happened in Thermopylae took 3 days. Where there was this onslaught of Persians, and they were in this narrow cliff, and that's why they used the terrain to their advantage. They knew it very, very well, right? And their tactics, they were perfect suited for that. Now, what's going on with why they are, celebrated for keeping Western culture is, you think about it, the big context for this is if the Persians manage to go through, ancient Greece becomes then subjugated to Persian values. They will actually become Persians in that regard. Think about what we're talking about. Okay, I've just mentioned 3 of them, 3 virtues, but the enterprise of philosophy wouldn't have gone around with Persians. You wouldn't have philosophy for one thing. You wouldn't have democracy either, because he was a tyrant, right? So all these things we take for granted that we've inherited from ancient Greece, and for better or worse, they came with all kinds of problems, some of them, but we embrace them, actually happened because 300 warriors decided to stand their ground, knowing that they were going to be sacrificed. Of course, there were more than 300. There were 7,000, like I said. And they were eventually defeated by a traitor, the Philotes, that I mentioned later on. We showed him a path to the Persians to the backside. And that's when he said, well, learning I saw, this is it, boys. Everybody else leave. And then, there were actually 700 Thespians and Thebans, and over 700 who decided to stay. Or they had less reason to stay than the Leonidas and company, because they weren't going to be celebrated. And they're still not celebrated. But beside the point, which the fact is that if we hadn't had these warriors there in that past holding the onslaught of Persians, Athenians, Spartans, and everybody else who actually rallied to fight the Persians in Marathon later on wouldn't have had a chance to get organized in time, actually. So this gave them enough time, this bottom time. That's all they were fighting for, extra days. 3 days, all they needed to finish. Of course, the Olympics, they weren't just playing the Olympics. But the Olympics had to be the kind of excuse that would be credible. They couldn't just say, well, we're having, what are we having, guys? But the Olympics was a good excuse to actually, a good reason, it's more than an excuse, to actually send people to their death. And then we go later on with the armies and try to fight them best as we can. And then, of course, it wasn't just marathon, it was also salamis, the naval battle that finally ended up undoing, the Persians later on. But because of that, I think this was instrumental, irony, in holding, a sense of being Greek that I think we have inherited. Like I said, the values of democracy, freedom of the will, and so on come from this time. So I think this is Did I answer your question? Okay, thank you. Now, do you think I made a good argument or not in terms of trying to revamp the Olympic Games? What I'm trying to tell you here is this, okay? I don't like the way they look nowadays. I look at Olympic Games, and yeah, of course, it's the biggest show on earth. 200 countries, 11,000 athletes, half the globe watching them. There's why something special about the Olympics, for all of us to drop everything and watch them as they are. But when I look at them, they don't bore me. But what I find most interesting is not simply also all these little stories we get on CNN about particular athletes and something like that. It's actually what happens on the field. With knowing much of the sport, there are certain sports that take off and people find very enthralling. It's the narratives we write about them. So what I'm trying to argue here is this. I think we've shaped modern Olympics, we built them up based on some values, these situs altus fortius, this is important to participate and so on, in ways which has made clash with each other, and they give us this kind of melange of things that to me is not working very, very well. So my argument here is, let's go back to ancient Greece and try to see if we can find other values which might actually help us improve on what we have already. Do a little critical work, patch it up, modernize it, so that we don't come with kind of problems, that Chelsea foreshadows in her question, saying, well, let's make it modern values. But with this, I think we could do better. So what do you think? Let me turn things from you. How good is the argument? Or how bad? There must be some problems with it, I'm sure, that I hadn't thought of, or maybe some issues that I think, well, how would you apply this to these other issues, this schema? Does it apply across the board, or just works with records, maybe, or even with that? Any ideas? You're on the spot now. Time to look down.
What's more important to the folks here? What's more important to the folks here? Is it the individual sports in the Olympics, or is it the nationalities? When you watch, do you want to see a good sporting event, or do you want to see America or Canada or wherever you're from win? And Delana, I'm going to call on you because you're a swimmer and the closest any of us will ever get to the Olympics. So, when you're watching, what do you think?
I like to watch for the sport, and I like to see, the athletes interact, how they, what's the newest thing, and stuff like that. Yes, it's cool to see, certain countries and the nationalities and how they represent, but at the same time, I think personally, I like to see the sports and see the competition, how fast it's grown, the suits, because I'm swimming, so the suits, the big there are controversies with those, and there's Darren Torres, and she had the whole someone's suit ripped, and she did a memorable moment where she said, no, let's wait till the person gets another suit, and then we can all race.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, was kind of tied in with some of those things. She was very, memorable on that, and that's really cool to see, because then it's, representing the country well, it's representing good sportsmanship, it's just everything, I think. Does that answer the question?
That's a very good question. Think about it. Actually, what it takes quite often to see why do you watch the Olympics is, are you into the sport in particular or not? Or are you simply wearing your flag because it happens to be the right color scheme with the right flag on it, right? If you understand the sport from the inside, or the activity, that's when it's very easy to actually appreciate these internal values, what makes it interesting. For you swimming, for example, I used to swim in high school and college as well. And I can appreciate swimming, whether I was the old times when before they wore these suits, just a little speeder, right? Very different. Now I wish I had those shark suits, something like that. But to some extent, you can appreciate how something is done to an excellent level. All of you here must have some kind of hobbies, right? What do people like to do here for a hobby in your spare time? It doesn't have to be sports, okay? But what kind of things do people indulge in your free time, other than working very hard for your degrees or your jobs?
Mass battles and mock combat.
Excellent.
3,000 people, 3,000 people on the field in armor with shields,
There you go.
and our motto is honor over victory.
There you go. Excellent. Actually, I've done myself some medieval Renaissance swordsmanship, where we've done some of these fight, in kind of melee, and you get lots of bruises and so on. But like you said, right, there are certain standards you want to live up to it. You don't want to bring there, in your case, a little grenade, boom, okay, there we go, that took care of them, right? Not only, I mean, if you were only about the win, you probably would do that. A few limbs flying around, but we won. What do you think of that, right? There are certain values that you're going to uphold, right? When you go and try to rush against each other with your armor and your battle, something like that. And that's what makes it actually fun and enjoyable. And you come to appreciate, oh, that was a good fight, or these guys are pulling dirty tricks. It's not quite so okay, right?
And even there's occasions where one side is outnumbered. They'll take 100 guys from one side, send them over the other side, so they'll be matched.
Or for the name of better competition, better contest.
Right.
And again, you know, going to look for some bodies, for example, it's not so much you have these three notions of competition, right? Either pure recreation, zero-sum game where everything is about getting the win, like Lombardi, or else maybe this collaboration where, well, let's make it more even to make it more interesting itself. Let's send the guys over. Or let's give her the swimsuit. Let's give her time, you know, to come here so it's actually more even. So I think these are ways which we actually tell us, why do you really enjoy watching the Olympics, or the activity you do? This is the internal aspect of looking at things, which is a lot more fun, actually. Yes?
I think what we're seeing is a more extreme manifestation of our nation state.
Mhm.
Some of the more negative attributes that
Yeah.
come to the front in our daily lives, in our interactions nationally and internationally. But we still have those core values, and that's what we cherish in these exceptional, what we consider exceptional stories.
Yeah.
You have the exception, the idea of the, what's the name of that gentleman that helped the other athletes?
Oh, Cecil Healy? The Italian.
The Italian.
Yeah.
I mean, we hang on those core values. We recognize them, we cherish those stories, and we treat them as the exception rather than the rule. And it seems that, at least from your description, the Spartans used that as the rule rather than the exception. So where did we flip?
That's very interesting, I think. You're right to think that back then was much more prevalent, and that's why I'm discussing this. I want to see more of this instead of less. Instead of being all these newsworthy, and everybody talks about it for a while, being it the norm more than the exception. If everybody behaved this way, I think the competitions will be more interesting. Let's bring the guys over there, you know. This is why I think trying to instrumentalize competition in terms of nationalism or aspects brings all these dubious ways of doing things. Think, for example, happened with the Chinese and German swimmers in the 80s and 70s, where they were in steroid programs to go faster, the swimmers. Or cycling in the United States, 84, where they actually have blood doping. At the time it wasn't illegal, now it is, but they used that to their advantage to win gold medals. Everything was known, well, this kind of Lombardi ethic, we gotta win, it's about the medals. We flipped the ethics at some point. However, what most of us really are moved by, eventually more than by the medals of the day, is like you're saying, you know, these kind of moments where somebody does something extraordinary. If that's what we value, why is it so rare? And when I'm trying to argue, things would be a lot better if it weren't so rare. We would get much better Olympics and sports and activities if you engage in this way. Of course, there's the ambition of trying to, so think of what makes us unique in this country. Ancient Greeks were very much community-oriented. We are into individualism. Okay, not that they are odds, but I think to some extent this notion of having to excel on my own way and trying to be the best I can be, seen in terms of, well, personal effort taken to an extreme, makes us want to take shortcuts sometimes. And we confuse the means for the end. You know, I think. Yeah.
Do you think that because these events of values are so rare, do you think that's why we may value them? Do you think if, like, say it was flipped and the Olympics were what they used to be, do you think the whole situation would be flipped where we would value the medals and the records more than the intrinsic acts if they were commonplace instead of rare as they are today?
That's a great question. I don't think personally that we would then, oh, we're used to that as another beautiful win in that regard, in the sense that it might be more common, but I don't think it makes us appreciate now the other aspects. I think there should be a balance no matter what. I don't say also forget our records altogether. They're not interesting. They have a place, but I think it's gone to the extreme. On the other side, we have more of this. I think, if anything, is the very issue at heart here. If we have more of this, it will make us actually appreciate even more. Because it would actually raise the standard. Think what happens when there's actually a good competition, both athletical or it could be academic. It raises the bar for everybody else, doesn't it? So these kind of moments, if anything, would be actually helping to get even better moments. And it's not like you have to have a limit in this regard. You simply try to do as many good moments as you can. And I don't think, I mean, psychologically, there might be a sense of which may not as interesting. But once you get as to why this is really worth it and valuable, it goes beyond the psychological, oh, I feel good or I feel bad or interested or not interested. This is more goes into the sense of why is it really meaningful? Why is it worth caring about? And I think that goes a little deeper than, well, it's just a flash in the pan or there is more to this to be had. That's a very good question.
Questions before we call it a night? Thank you, everyone, for coming. Jesus, thank you so much, coming all the way from Oregon for this again. There are, according to the people who know these things, there are 11 people connected watching this and participating in the conversation, so thank you all for coming. This will be eventually on the web, so you can watch it again, and it might take a month or so to get it up, because, you know, it's April. But also, it's going to take about 15 or 20 minutes to break this stuff down, but then I'm hoping that Jesus and I and anyone who wants to join us can hang out and talk, maybe have a drink, go get a bite to eat, continue the conversation, so please consider staying and continue the conversation while we break things down. Jesus is here for a while, and thank you all for coming, and I'll let you all know about the next one. And thank you, everyone, on the web.
Thank you for coming this beautiful day. I really appreciate it.